All right, so today we are talking about the Neo-Freudian Theorists. Now, the three individuals that are addressed today are two men, one Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and then one female, Karen Horney. The three of these individuals are considered supporters of the psychoanalytic perspective. So while we talked about Freud and his contributions yesterday and the day before, today we're looking at how these three differ from Freud. Now, all three of these individuals, these Neo-Freudians, do largely focus on the role of the unconscious. They believe that our childhood is very pivotal in our personality formation. How they differ is how Freud always links everything back to the sexual and aggressive urges that we are born with. So Carl Jung, a man considered a disciple of Freud, believed in the id, ego, and superego. He believed that our personality that is influenced by these three forces make us uniquely different from one another. He believes that our childhood is a pivotal time in our lives, but he also believes in what's called the collective unconscious. He believed that there is part of the mind that contains inherited instincts, urges, and memories common to all people. And he believed that there are these universal principles that are passed down from generation to generation that also impact our overall personality. And these are things that we share with other humans. One specific example might be something you are familiar with in English classes, maybe humanities or other English classes, is a word called archetype. Archetypes are inherited ideas based on the experiences of your ancestors, and they shape one's perception of the world. And so we have archetypes that kind of explain these universal principles that are common to all of us. For example, many of you know the biblical story of David and Goliath, or you know the fable of Jack and the Beanstalk. These two examples are stories in which a small, weaker, inferior, but good individual triumphs over a giant or someone that is superior to them but is evil. And so it's kind of this whole good versus evil principle. More presently, people have referenced Star Wars and how the imperial forces were defeated by the smaller and weaker rebel forces. So these can be stories, they can be archetypes that we see in music, in paintings, oral tradition, stories passed down from generation to generation. So Carl Jung really focused on these universal principles that are common to all of us. Carl Jung is another, has many more contributions to the field of psychology, but really for chapter 15 and the purposes of the test, what you really need to focus on is linking Carl Jung with the collective unconscious. Alfred Adler is another psychoanalytic psychologist that, like Freud, focused on the role of the unconscious. Alfred Adler really stressed, like the others, that childhood was a pivotal time in our development, in the formation of our personality, And I think a lot of us in the classroom would agree that a lot of what happened to us when we were little greatly influenced the development of our personality. Alfred Adler stresses how, as young infants, growing through our first and second year of development, we are so completely dependent on other people. We can't feed ourselves, we can't take care of ourselves, change our own diapers, clothe ourselves, and without adults in our lives, we wouldn't survive. Well, what he believes is as we get older, we try and establish autonomy. We try and establish our independence. And sometimes we frustrate our parents because we want to do things for ourselves, and that's healthy. But if parents stifle our independence, if they do everything for us, what Adler worries is that it actually fosters later troubles when a young adult or individual tries to do something on their own and they fail. They're not equipped with the skills to be able to overcome adversity. And I think a lot of us know people whose parents always get them out of sticky situations. They seem to have things handed to them on a silver platter, and they don't appreciate things as much. And they might be prone to this inferiority complex he describes, which is a pattern of avoiding feelings of inadequacy rather than trying to overcome their source. So people who have had things handed to them their whole childhood, when a crisis does occur as an adult, rather than have the effective coping skills to overcome these difficulties, they may have an inferiority complex, and they might might pout, they might be, selfish, they might, just deal with them in a not so healthy way. So this is important according to Adler. One example of someone who has an inferiority complex I like to use as an example is Lord Farquaad on Shrek. Many of you have heard of short man syndrome. Some people use short man syndrome as an example of inferiority complex, and how Lord Farquaad, had his armor with his extension legs. He had a very tall castle to compensate for his short stature. And really, rather than dealing with some of the insecurities, he tries to compensate with these other material things. So, in a nutshell, it's really important for us to struggle when we're little, to learn that failure is inevitable, but it's what we learn from those difficulties and how we grow as an individual that really matters. If our parents never let us fail and figure out how to deal with adversity, they're actually doing us a disservice. All right, and the last one that we're going to be talking about today, the last Neo-Freudian theorist, is a woman by the name of Karen Horney. And Karen really was a feminist of her day, and she really was frustrated with Freud. When we talked about his psychosexual theory of personality, and we talked about the phallic stage, and how Freud mentioned that women tend to have penis envy and weak superegos, she countered that. She said that was absolutely ridiculous. Like Freud, she believed that the childhood is very important, but that the social, not sexual tensions are what are crucial for personality formation. So it's the people that we surround ourselves with. It's our parents and our friends, our teachers, our coaches, when we are young, that allow for us to flourish and to develop our unique personality that separates us from one another. She also argues that anxiety in our childhood is inevitable because we are so dependent on others. But she argues that this childhood anxiety actually triggers our desire for love and security. And the relationships that we have, our social context, helps us cope and effectively deal with the anxiety and gain confidence and self-esteem. So these three individuals obviously have contributed way more than just what I quickly summarized, but this is really in a nutshell what you need to know for the test and for today's open note quiz for those of you that are taking it.